today are based in part on estimates from two surveys. Statistics like the unemployment rate, labor force, total employment, and the number of unemployed are derived from a survey of households, otherwise known as the current population survey. Simply put, the household survey is meant to capture the employment and labor force status of individuals within Colorado during a given period. The household survey also includes the self-employed, independent contractors, farm workers, and those not attached to a traditional payroll employer. However, we are unable to break out those individuals at the state level. Non-farm payroll job estimates come from a survey of business establishments and government agencies and are intended to measure the number of jobs, not the number of people employed. These estimates exclude employees in agriculture, private households, and the self-employed. As we noted in today's press release, the reference period for the establishment of household surveys was the pay period or week that includes the 12th of the month. The reference week for October was specifically October 10th to October 16th. Therefore, these data provide a snapshot of Colorado's employment situation as vaccination rates among the adult population continued to increase and pandemic-related restrictions were relaxed for businesses across the state. Additionally, the October reference week overlaps a period in which COVID-19 case rates for Colorado and the nation remain elevated compared to earlier in the year. Revisions to October data, along with preliminary estimates for November, those will be released on Friday, December 17th. Additionally, expected revisions to non-farm payroll estimates for second quarter 2021, those will be released next Tuesday, November 23rd. Let's start off with the results from the household survey. Colorado's seasonally adjusted unemployment rate decreased to 5.4% in October from 5.6% in September. This marks a continued decline in the unemployment rate over the past 6 months. The rate was at 6.4% in April. Additionally, the number of unemployed Coloradans dropped by 8,600 in October to 171,300 in total. The count of unemployed individuals in the state has decreased by 46,600 over the past year. However, over half of that decline has come over the past 3 months. As a reminder, the total unemployed figure derived from the household survey includes a broader definition of unemployment beyond just those receiving UI benefits. In October, Colorado was tied with 3 states, Louisiana, Rhode Island, and Texas, for the 34th lowest seasonally adjusted unemployment rate in the nation. Nebraska had the lowest rate at 1.9%, while California and Nevada had the highest rates at 7.3%. The unemployment rate for the US decreased by 0.2 of a percentage point last month to 4.6%. Colorado's employment to population ratio of 64.5% in October ranked as the 7th highest in the nation. In comparison, the US employment population ratio last month was 58.8%. The employment to population ratio measures the share of the state's 16+ population that is employed. The ratio of 64.5% in October is the highest for the state since it was at 66.8% in February 2020. Additionally, October marked the first time since May that the employment population ratio has risen for 2 consecutive months. The state's labor force participation rate of 68.2% ranked 4th highest in October and well exceeds the US rate of 61.6%. Despite Colorado's participation rate remaining flat last month, the number of individuals in the labor force experienced the largest over the month increase since April, and that was a gain of 3,300. Looking back, the state has the 10th fastest rate of recovery in the participation rate in the nation. And what I mean by that is basically measuring the difference in the rate in October 2021 compared to the rate in February of 2020. While we typically talk about recovery in the participation rate, I do think it's notable that Colorado is only one of 12 states with an estimated October 2021 labor force that exceeds the February 2020 level. As we mentioned in today's press release, the counties with the highest not seasonally adjusted unemployment rates were Pueblo, Huerfano, Los Animas, Fremont, and Pitkin. That's relatively unchanged from what we've reported the past few months, other than the inclusion of Pitkin County. 56 Colorado counties had October unemployment rates that were under 5%. A year prior, that number totaled to 23. Additionally, a total of 40 Colorado counties had unemployment rates that were lower than the US not seasonally adjusted unemployment rate of 4.3% last month. Among the 7 metropolitan areas in the state, Pueblo had the highest unemployment rate at 6.8%. Boulder and Fort Collins had the lowest rates at 3.5 and 3.8% respectively. Denver, Greeley, Colorado Springs, and Grand Junction all had rates between 4.6 and 4.7%. And it is recommended to compare these sub-state rates I mentioned to the statewide not seasonally adjusted unemployment rate of 4.5%. Moving on to the establishment survey, the preliminary estimates show that on a seasonally adjusted basis, Colorado added 10,600 non-farm payroll jobs from September to October. That represents the largest monthly gain in jobs for the state since July. Additionally, September payroll figures were revised up by 4,600 jobs, which altered the change from August to a gain of 9,700 rather than the originally reported gain of 5,100. As a reminder, monthly revisions are based on additional responses from businesses and government agencies since the last published estimates. Colorado's over-the-month change of 10,600 non-farm payroll jobs ranked as the 19th largest nationally in October. The state has added 129,600 payroll jobs in the first 10 months of 2021. That ranks nationally as the 13th most jobs gained so far in 2021. Colorado has now regained 313,100 of the 375,800 non-farm payroll jobs lost in March and April of last year. That total job gain of 313,100 over the past 18 months represents a recovery of a little over 83% of those lost jobs early in 2020. And that ranks as the 16th fastest rate of recovery in the nation over that period. A similar analysis of the change in US non-farm payroll jobs since April 2020 revealed the US has added back about 81% of lost jobs. So as we noted in today's press release, Colorado continues to outpace the US in terms of job recovery. The majority of industry super sectors experienced some gains in October. Leisure and hospitality led with payroll growth totaling 6,800 last month. Of those gains, 5,100 came from accommodation and food services, while 1,700 were from arts, entertainment, and recreation. As I mentioned last month, leisure and hospitality continues to be a primary driver of industry gains in 2021, accounting for about 64% of jobs added in 2021. Other industries with substantial job gains last month include trade, transportation, and utilities, and professional and business services. Both of those industries added around 2,000 jobs. Other services was the only industry with sizable loss in October. In the first 10 months of 2021, when looking at the state's 18 industry sectors, accommodation and food services has added the most jobs at 65,400, about 50% of all total non-farm payroll jobs. Arts, entertainment, and recreation has the second most gains at 17,100. Professional and technical services has added 15,200 payroll jobs in 2021. And government rounds out the top 4 at 12,300 job gains this year. On the other hand, a number of industries have varying levels of job loss since December. This includes retail trade, admin support and waste management services, construction, and finance and insurance. Overall, the private sector has added 10,000 jobs in October, and September payroll numbers were revised up 3,300 jobs. The September revisions to the private sector altered the change from August to a gain of 11,700 rather than the originally reported increase of 8,400. That actually marks the most private jobs added over the month since May. The October gain of 10,000 private sector jobs ranked 22nd nationally, while the revised September gain ranked 12th. From May 2020 to October, private businesses have added 315,500 payroll jobs, compared to losses of 362,200 in March and April of last year. That represents a recovery of around 87% of private sector jobs lost earlier last year, and that outpaces the US recovery rate of 85%. And like with total non-farm, Colorado's private sector job recovery rate ranks as the 16th fastest in the nation. And then finally, here are some recovery rates for sub-state Colorado, specifically the 7 metropolitan statistical areas, or MSA, and the residual of a state that's not in an MSA. The Colorado Springs MSA has the fastest job recovery and is the first metro area to return to a pre-pandemic level of unemployment. That recovery rate is at 102%. The Denver MSA has the second fastest recovery at 85%. The Grand Junction, Fort Collins, Pueblo, and Boulder MSAs all have recovery rates between 70 and 74%. And then the Greeley MSA lags the rest of the state with a recovery rate of 51%. Now, while I've mentioned before that we do not break out non-farm payroll jobs by county, we can, however, look at the recovery rate for the residual of the state that is not in an MSA, and that aggregates to what we can define as 47 non-metro counties. Those areas shed a combined total of 59,300 payroll jobs in early 2020, but have regained back 50,800, or 86% of those lost jobs. And before we get into the questions, and you could chat in your questions here, I do want to give a little plug to what we've been producing over the last couple months and will produce forward on LMI Gateway. This is a Tableau dashboard, and we're planning to continue expanding to come up with ideas for good data visualizations. What I've done is I've put into chat our Tableau dashboard. If you want to bookmark it, that's great. You can also access that link through our homepage on LMI Gateway. I'll put in that link here too. And basically what we have here is a few statistics. It is updated today. We basically aim to have it updated sometime before noon on employment situation days, as long as everything goes right. And right now we have 5 graphics that you can look at. The first one is a graph which looks at the unemployment rate for the US and Colorado. And then our second graphic is a state map of all the states in the nation with a lot of labor force statistics. And this goes back several years. This includes the unemployment rate, the number of unemployed, labor force numbers, and labor force participation rate. We also have a county map, which provides similar statistics for Colorado counties. County data is released on about a 2-week lag from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So it'll be a couple of weeks until that data set's updated with October data. And then finally, we also have a graph that compares, that looks at Colorado's employment to population ratio, as well as the labor force participation rate since 2000. And then we have a regional recovery rate, looks at states that are around Colorado and what is the rate of job recovery for those states. So anyways, I just want to point that out if you're not already aware. I do find it could be pretty helpful. And with that, I'm happy to take questions. And if we don't have any questions, we can end early. Okay, so Tamara is asking, if Colorado's recovery is outpacing the US, why is our unemployment rate still on the higher end of all states? That's a good question. We've talked about this a bit previously. Just keep in mind that when we're talking about job recovery, that's from the establishment survey. When we're talking about unemployment rate, that's from the household survey. So they are different surveys that measure different things. When we're talking about the unemployment rate, Colorado's unemployment rate is elevated. One reason Colorado's unemployment rate is elevated compared to the US is because the state has had a faster recovery in the labor force participation rate. If you don't have, so you may have a higher number of people that are unemployed. To be unemployed, you have to be actively seeking, available, and looking for work over the last 4 weeks. With the U.S. Recovery and labor force participation rate, it's a lot lower than Colorado's. So Colorado kind of gets, I guess, statistically deemed for having people actively in the labor force. I actually think it's not a bad thing that Colorado's unemployment rate is higher. And again, we've seen a really rapid decline in the unemployment rate over the last 4 to 6 months. But just something to kind of keep an eye out in terms of the U.S. labor force participation rate. That has essentially been very, very flat since, I would say, late fall of last year. Aldo asks, any sense on why we're seeing job decreases in construction given the demand out there? Is that more people exiting the sector? It's possible that construction is having a number of issues in terms of supply chain issues. Construction's, since the Great Recession, has had issues finding workers. I think that's been well documented. We've seen some gains in construction over the last couple of months here or there. When we released expected revisions on Tuesday, you will see that currently the establishment survey is underestimating construction employment. And so instead of what we're currently estimating as a slight job loss for construction, it might be a slight job gain. That said, construction is lagging other industry sectors in terms of recovery. All right, we have an unemployment question, so I will defer to our unemployment insurance expert to answer
that. So Ashley, what's the adjudication backlog in Colorado for unemployment claims? I would have to look for a little bit of clarity. Remember, there was still a backlog related to claims that were filed during the pandemic. However, all of those claims prior fell under the executive order that existed through the governor all the way through roughly September, where we were not holding up payment of benefits for those claims. So as those claims are being processed, some of those are being auto-adjudicated as we go through the process. So this might be a good point to let employers know and claimants know that there will be a series of additional decisions coming out on some of those prior claims here through the next series of weeks that will be providing benefits to individuals, but also informing those employers that because the claim is filed as a result of COVID-19, there's no charge to their unemployment insurance account. Now, since August, when the executive order expired, they have been holding up payment of benefits while we're processing unemployment insurance claims. In general, it generally takes 4 to 6 weeks to process an unemployment insurance claim. Obviously, we've still had a slightly higher load at this point in time. So it could take longer than that at this point in time. Staff continue to process claims as they come in on a weekly basis. There have been changes statutorily to employers, which has been helpful in the fact that employers now only have 7 days to provide their protest to an unemployment insurance claim. Anecdotally, I've seen claims processed as quickly as 7 days at this point in time. It's also important to remember one of the other things that will hold up the claim is having to go through IDB and making sure that you are verifying your identity on those issues. So there are various issues that can hold up the claim. But again, it depends which backlog we're talking about. Staff are getting pretty close to being a little less of that backlog here on the current claims. But again, we still have backlog from those prior pandemic claims, and there'll be a series of auto-adjudicated decisions going out shortly.
Thanks, Phil. So Aldo, your question is the state's JOLTS report out today? And if so, what did we see in the quote rate? So I'm going to put a link into the JOLTS. Here's that link. Definitely bookmark that. What the BLS has decided is to release state level JOLTS data, which is lagged by a month from what we are currently reporting. So if we're reporting the October employment situation, the most recent JOLTS data is going to be from September. If I have time to look at JOLTS data, which I did not today, I would be able to tell you what the JOLTS trends are. That may be a problem going forward in terms of reporting JOLTS data concurrently with the employment situation. But I do encourage you to visit the site. I have not been able to look at it. I don't know what the quit rate is. I would be yeah, I can't I can't guess what it is. But if you guys want, like probably Mondays after the employment situation are probably good for me to discuss JOLTS Day with you independently if you have questions on that. It's just very difficult to really assess all of these trends on a single day. But thanks for pointing that out, Aldo. But again, the data is there. And I think you can look at the schedule too on BLS. I'm not sure if the 2022 schedule is out yet for states, but that is, at least for 2021, that's available. Ad asks, is there any way to estimate who is filling those 10,600 new jobs? Can we assume that these are formerly unemployed people, unemployed, or people who have been sitting out of the workforce? Or is there any sense from the surveys that these people have been employed and just changing jobs? And unfortunately, at the state level, we really can't look at those flows. National data there are, and again, specifically from the current population survey, there's estimates of saying, did they move from not in the labor force to unemployed? Did they move from not in the labor force to employed? Did they move from employed to unemployed? Or did they move from unemployed to say not in the labor force? I would guess that it's going to be a mixture of a lot of things, these 10,600 jobs. It could be someone who's unemployed, right? And gaining employment. It could be someone who is just not in the labor force. They haven't looked for a while, but they just decided they were going to re-enter the labor force, and they just pretty much skipped the unemployed process and just went straight to employed. So it's a combination of things, but unfortunately, it's not really something that we're able to break out. Tamara asks, our labor force participation rate is still down from April. Is there an indication that people are continuing to leave the labor force even as jobs are filled? As I mentioned, we talk about the participation rate, and that is based on our estimate of labor force for a given month and an estimated population. The estimate of population isn't from a census or anything, and is probably subject to a lot of revisions. As I also mentioned today too, we can look at the labor force totals. And as I mentioned, Colorado is only one of 12 states that the labor force level is higher now than it was pre-pandemic. In fact, Colorado also has the, I believe, 7th fastest change in the labor force since the pandemic started. So in terms of the labor force participation rate, it's down about 0.5 percentage point. That's not too bad. It's still, again, one of the fastest recoveries in the nation. As I mentioned, it was 10th. So I think that especially October finally showed some upward movement in the labor force totals, moving up 3,300. So I think that's a really good sign of an upward trend in labor force, and hopefully that continues throughout the rest of the year. But I will add that, again, the labor market is very dynamic. And we try our best to derive what these trends mean, but there's a lot of churn, and unfortunately I don't have information in terms of like, oh, X number of people retired, or this is specifically why they exited the labor force. So I wish we could have all that data, but there's only so much you could do at the aggregate level. Yeah, another question, could you touch on the impact of federal pandemic benefits ending on these numbers? Where did you see the impact most other than the employment numbers? Again, it's difficult to attach, are these gains, right? So in both series, we saw gains in employment. We saw total non-farm jobs go up over 10,000. We saw total employment, again, the number of individuals go up over 10,000. So both of those series moved in similar directions. Again, we also saw the unemployment drop. We've seen regular UI claims level out at around 2,000 per week. And so, I do think there's indication that we're seeing for October faster levels of employment growth than maybe what we saw in September and in August. Although I will mention though, September did experience a large upward revision. So I think it's very probable that when we're talking about those employment gains, there is a component of those individuals who were on the federal programs. Again, that's think PUA or PEUC that went from unemployed status to employed status. great questions. I'm happy to answer any others if anyone has them. I'll give you a minute to type those in. Okay, so Ed asked, following Tamara's question, is this the first time since April that the labor force grew? You're challenging me a second just to look up the data. So let me just get to you real quick. It's kind of bounced around since April, but let me just pull up some data here so I can answer that question. Okay. So, when I'm talking about the month-to-month movements, I will refer to the seasonally adjusted data, just so you know. Again, we also have not seasonally adjusted estimates. But in terms of labor force, in April, it was about 3.196 million in the labor force. And then May, it moved to 3.199 million. So that was a gain of about 2,200. And then since then, basically between May and September, the labor force dropped just slightly from, again, 3.196 million to 3.193 million. And then for October, it bumped back up to a little under 3.197 million. So that gain of 3,300 is the largest we saw since April. In April, the gain in April in the labor force was about roughly 8,000. So just kind of give you an idea of what that trend looks like. Although I know it's still early, but any sense of seasonal retail hiring and what trends we might see in that in this year in that area? I think we typically start seeing some of those trends maybe in November. Again, think about the reference week. We're talking about the reference week of the 12th. So I'm uncertain if maybe retail starts gearing up in September. Again, with the impact of the pandemic, you have to take some seasonal adjustment data with a grain of salt, as seasonal patterns have really been distorted. So I think it may not be until December where we can really start gauging those trends, Aldo. I think by that time, we should see that hiring really built up, particularly for those industries that had those seasonal hiring. So we're going to report December data in January. So again, it may take a couple months to comb out some of those trends. I will mention though that retail employment growth has again been pretty much flat since fall of last year. It was one of the fastest industries to recover pre-pandemic losses. And that was mainly due to the shift in demand for grocery needs, home DIY projects. And so really since September of last year, we've seen retail trade essentially flat. And again, you could see all those trends that we provide along with the press release. We have 20 some odd charts or something where you can look through and see some of those industry trends. We break them out by fastest growing, recovery, as well as different wage breakouts. So low wage industries, medium wage industries, and high wage industries. Tamara asked, regarding the recent revisions this year, especially in September, what are the key changes compared to what you said in past meetings? I think that for September, that employment growth was, from a jobs perspective, was much stronger than what we originally estimated. And while we've seen, recently we had seen some downward revisions once we moved past a month, but this was definitely the largest upward revision we've seen in a while. Really looking too at the U.S. They go through two sets of revisions. So like August data will be revised twice, September data revised twice. State level data is only revised once. again, this is all before, the annual benchmarking that occurs early next year. But the U.S. has experienced very large revisions in the August and September. So what we originally had reported as pretty weak gains in the U.S. in terms of employment change for August to September now actually look pretty decent. So sorry, I'm like looking away from you here. I'm just pulling up some data here. And so, August right now is those gains are at just under a $500 million for the US. If I recall correctly, that's probably been revised up by 150,000 or so over the past couple months. September, which last month was reported gains of under 200,000 for the US, that had an upward revision of over 100,000. Again, these are sample-based estimates and they are subject to revision. So it is important to pay attention to both the preliminary estimate, but then also what does the revised data look like? And that also points to the key fact of looking at also, if you're looking at what does recovery look like, what does employment growth look like, at our expected revision series that we release each quarter, that will come out next Tuesday. And again, that's looking at data from the quarterly census of employment and wages, which is basically what is the baseline for what we use for a benchmarking process. And you can really see where we expect some of those revisions to occur at the industry sector level, as well as the metropolitan statistical area level. And to mention, while the unemployment rate doesn't really, we don't see the unemployment rate undergo monthly revisions too often. When we go through the benchmarking process, there will be changes to the labor force totals, the employment totals, and the unemployment totals. And that will also alter the labor force participation rate, employment to population ratio, and the unemployment rate. Last year, we did see substantial changes for certain months, particularly like April, in those variables. So again, that's also something important to look at, and it's possible that it could improve Colorado's situation opposed to what we're reporting now. Brianna asks, is there any indication as to why the Greeley MSA is lagging so far behind other MSAs for job recovery? That's a good question. I think it's primarily due to concentration in oil and gas. While oil prices have rebounded and even exceeded pre-pandemic levels, oil production and oil employment is still lagging. And so that's one reason why Greeley is lagging. Construction too, as we mentioned, is a lagging industry in terms of recovery. And so that may also impact Greeley, as Greeley can have a higher concentration of construction that may be tied to the oil and gas industry as well. So I think it's really driven by industry components for Greeley. Great questions. Any others? I'll hold for about a minute here and then see if we have any. Okay, with that, I think we can wrap this up. As I mentioned at the beginning of the call, revisions to October data along with preliminary estimates for November, that will be released Friday, December 17th. We'll have a call for that. If you don't already have Christmas plans, please, or holiday plans, please join us for that. And look forward to talking to you guys next month. Thanks.